Hello, this is Mackenzie Tuttle, and in this photo essay, I will be exploring some of the key takeaways that I received from reading Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, as well as some of the ways that I can apply these takeaways into my current and future social work practice. In working my way through Paulo Freire's work, there were two main takeaways that I received. The first of these was that many individuals face and suffer from inequality based on their low educational attainment and status. The second of these takeaways was that many individuals face inequality from their lower statuses within society, as well as their vulnerable statuses within society, such as those of children. In looking at my first key takeaway from Freire's work, inequality among individuals regarding their levels of educational attainment, one particular quote comes to mind. It is on page 56, and Paulo Freire says, "It is only the oppressed who, by freeing themselves, can free their oppressors." This quote epitomizes so much of what Freire is going for in his novel, playing a big role in his theme of inequality within our education system. So much of the cycle of oppression comes from those who used to be oppressed themselves. How then do we break this cycle? The first and most important key step is education. Education opens the door to any and everything. Through education, oppressed individuals learn that there is freedom out there, a life separate from their oppressors. However, unfortunately, for so many oppressed individuals and groups, fair, equal, quality education is extremely hard to come by, leading to even greater levels of oppression. Our job as social workers needs to be in removing these barriers to formal and informal education for these oppressed members of society. As Freire says, almost never do they being the oppressed, realize that they too know things. How sad is it that the oppressed become so downtrodden and overlooked that even when they are eventually educated in the future, they distrust their understanding and knowledge. In working through Freire's book, as well as participating in our class discussion, it became so clear to me just how vital education is to creating social change of any kind. Once we create equality in this educational context, we can then move towards creating equality in other contexts as well, such as among other vulnerable populations, such as neglected and abandoned children. The second key lesson that I took away from Freire's work was the concept of inequality among vulnerable children, specifically in regard to generational transmission. As Freire states, during the initial stage of their struggle, the oppressed find in the oppressor their model of manhood. And having previously worked within the realm of foster care, this concept rang devastatingly true. As children within the foster care system are the oppressed, they live day in and day out through trauma, abuse, and neglect, forced on them by their oppressors. Leaving foster care through adoption, reunification, or aging out of the system, everybody hopes for a happy ending for these children. However, all too often, they find themselves with their own children in the system years later, repeating the entire cycle they once lived through, living out oppressive traits and life choices with their own kids that they were once oppressed on themselves as children. While the cycle of oppression can take a multitude of different forms within social work, it is our job as social workers and community changers to find these cycles and do what we can to bring them to a halt. Overall, while there were other countless lessons that I learned from reading and discussing these 3 chapters from Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I will definitely strive to keep the key takeaways that I have previously mentioned in mind as I continue through my social work career. In examining individuals and their given situations through a lens of compassion and understanding rather than domination and hate, I will work to bridge these gaps between educational inequality and the generational transmission of oppression and inequality among vulnerable groups. I will also strive to continue to grow in my understanding and knowledge of such oppressed groups, holding Freire's statement that, in order for the oppressed to be able to wage the struggle for their liberation, they must perceive the reality of oppression not as a closed world from which there is not an exit, but as a limiting situation which they can transform. Near and dear to my heart, striving to become that transforming agent for the oppressed in their search for education and equality, as individuals, families, and communities. While I know I won't be able to change the world for everybody, I hope that through incorporating these lessons and takeaways that I have learned through Paulo Freire's work into my social work practice in the future, as well as into my work with communities and my community analysis project, that I will be able to at least change the world for a few kids along the way or a few communities that I'm lucky enough to interact with down the road.